professor at the Department of Computer Science at Purdue University, and currently he leads the interdisciplinary research ideas lab at Purdue, mainly working on modeling the human and the social aspects using AI, robotics, graphics, and vision. So his core research interests are in effective computing, computer graphics, autonomous agents, quantitative modeling, and planning for intelligent characters. He is currently serving as a senior editor for IIITD Robotics and Application Letters in the area of planning and simulation. His work has won multiple awards at top graphics and VR conferences. He has previously worked in many research labs, including Disney Research and Intel. Aniket's research has been featured on CBS, Wired, Forbes, Fast Company, Times of India, etc. And today, Aniket will be talking about a very interesting topic, which is designing emotionally intelligent digital humans that move, express, and feel like us. So over to you, Aniket, and thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for the awesome introduction, and thank you everybody for taking the time out from after your exams and busy lives. So recent advances in AI, AR, and VR technologies are gradually enabling humans and virtual agents to coexist, co-work, and share spaces in different environments, and it's becoming more important for technologies to sort of model these interactions, these motions and emotions of people for different applications, from virtual reality to healthcare applications to entertainment applications like games, or even things like social robotics. So today I'm going to talk about how we model them for these agents to be a little bit more human-like, so that they can express just like us. So with the rise of mass market devices, virtual reality is finally becoming more commonplace. There's a new rise of social VR where people are exploring virtual worlds with other people as well as other intelligent agents. At the same time, we've also seen a massive increase of virtual reality in the healthcare sector, from like training doctors or virtual therapists. So I recently read that one-fifth of all Facebook employees, or now Meta employees, are working on AR and VR applications or projects. Some estimates saying that Microsoft will end up spending over $22 billion to work on augmented reality headsets for the US military. And I'm pretty sure you've heard of all the metaverse-related developments. So obviously I am a little bit biased because this is my research, but if you ask me, we are at the potentially big junction of this AR and VR revolution, fueled by these intelligent and functional virtual agents. So with all that motivation, and slides not working, let's give it a few seconds. Okay. Let's dive into virtual humans. So just a quick heads up, throughout this talk I'll be using the word agent a lot, and depending on the context, depending on the application, an agent may mean different things. It may mean a digital human, a social robot, or virtual character. For this talk, it broadly refers to any virtual character, mostly in the context of animation. So as we interact more and more with virtual agents in our everyday lives, it becomes very important to make sure that these interactions are believable, thereby enhancing the overall experience. Right? So our research goal in my lab is, I'll just say it. Our research, I can see my screen, so I'll just say it. So my research goal, or our research goal, is to make sure these is to model the human behaviors and emotions for these virtual human-like agents. But at the same time, also assist and enable more collaborative, more natural, and more behaviorally aware human-agent interactions and locomotion in the virtual world. So before jumping into modeling these digital or virtual emotional or behavioral states, I know a lot of folks here are working on affective computing, on emotion modeling, and to a lot of you, some of it would be repetitive, but for the broader context, I'll give some notion of affect and emotion. Right? So affect is the scientific term for emotion, which is commonly represented as either discrete categories or continuous dimensions. So discrete categories consist of emotions that we're familiar with in everyday conversations, right? Like happy, angry, sad, bored, surprised, and so on. While these terms are very easy to be understand intuitively, they are very hard to define rigorously. At the same time, continuous dimensions tackles these problems as describing emotions as three fundamental properties of valence, arousal, and dominance on three principal axes. So valence indicates how pleasant or unpleasant an emotion is. Arousal indicates how much the emotion is tied into low or high physiological intensity, and dominance sort of talks about how much the emotion imposes on the observer, right? Again, a simple example like happy would indicate high valence, but a medium and low, medium dominance and medium arousal. At the same time, things like anger would indicate low valence and a high arousal and a high dominance. And the extreme end of the other spectrum, things like sadness would indicate a low valence, low arousal, and low dominance. And most recent studies have also shown that these representations can be mapped to each other. So emotions are perceived from multiple cues and modalities, and the most widely studied modalities in the field of affective computing are usually faces, speech, and written text. But more recent studies have also shown that body expressions play a very important critical role in the perception of affect. So in this study, they showed pictures of tennis participants. They showed participants pictures of tennis players after winning or losing a match. So this is a live user study we'll do right here. So these are pictures of tennis players after winning or losing a match. What do you think player 1 looks like? Do you think he won the match, or do you think he lost the match? What do you think about player 2? I'll give you 10 seconds to think about it, and then I'll randomly start, asking you. Yeah, so have you looked at all these images? Okay. Player 1, who all think that this person has won the match? Who all think this person has lost the match? Okay. What about player 2? Who all think this person has lost the match? Who all think this person has won the match? Interesting. Interesting. What do you think player 3 looks like? 1. This is getting into more of the confusing territory now, okay? So let me show you the results and see if you are 100% accurate or you were absolutely wrong. So player 1 lost the match. Player 2 won the match. All those 1 or 2 people who were accurate, give yourselves a pat on the back. So on and so forth, right? In the same study, they also showed participants of their body expressions, their body language. Now I'll ask the same question. Do you think player 1 won the match or lost the match? Okay, so hands up if you think this guy won the match. Okay. Hands up if you think they lost the match. Oh, almost no one. Okay. What about player 2? Do you think he won the match or lost the match? Lost? Lost? Anybody thinks that player 2 won? Okay, one lone person. Okay. So, sorry to disappoint, but he lost the match. So, you saw the results, right? There was a lot of confusion when you're looking at just the faces. And faces have been one of the most widely studied modality when it comes to affect recognition. Clearly, many of you were incorrect, or at least partly confused when you're looking at just the faces. But at the same time, when you're looking at the body expression, things became much more clearer. So participants' responses also showed a similar trend. It sort of demonstrates that body expressions are very important, are critical in terms of, or essential in terms of affect modeling. For us, for our lab, this has been a big motivation, and this not just this research, but a lot of other social psychology research, which stems from understanding body language, have been a key part for our research on body expressions, which have been relatively unexplored in the realm of affective computing. So body expressions or body language for virtual agent is essential to convey naturalness and ease interaction. In short, to make them more trustworthy. So we have developed multiple such approaches when it comes to body expressions, be it gaits, gestures, hand gestures, hand expressions. But in the interest of time, I'll be focusing today's talk on just the first two, the gaits and gestures. So let's start by looking at the problem of gaits. So in this work, we focus on the problem of generating emotive walking styles or gaits. So studies in affective computing show that humans observe physiological features such as arm swings, head jerks, upper body postures when attempting to perceive somebody else's emotional state, right? So these features are collectively called as affective features, and they are therefore used to classify walking styles or gaits into different emotional states. So our goal is to train a neural model to learn from these perceptual features of the human body and then tie it into a specific affect or specific emotion. So there's different kinds of affective features. I'm not going to go into the depth. So there are some features which are intra-frame affective features, which are like inside a frame, which looks into all these things I talked about, like head jerk, head motions, arm swings, and things to define them can be in forms of angles, ratios, or distances. At the same time, there are many inter-movement features which capture the motion of the agent. Things like root height, root orientation, stepping phase, stepping frequency. So the stepping phase determines the elevation of the feet between different footfalls, and the stepping phase stepping frequency is its time derivative. So let's formulate this problem as a sequence prediction task and we learn the conditional distribution space as a neural network. So the neural network is represented by a function f. It takes the motion history as input and is conditioned by the emotion labels E. So for optimizing the network, we prepare a loss function using distance metrics between the generated data and the target motions, as well as their time derivatives and motion velocities. And obviously, to constrain the loss, we use regularizations in the form of differences between the intermediate features and differences from the intermediate features, such as these affective features and also movement features.
So you're using those angles as features and then
yeah, so all those smaller, yes, angles, ratios, metrics, and all those stepping phase, stepping frequency, those are the features, yes.
So how do you choose the distance metric for this minimization? Because when angles are involved, it's no longer natural to use, let's say, Euclidean distance function here.
Like, what do you mean?
So, because angles are involved.
Yeah, so angles have, like, what kind of distance metrics you're saying?
Yes, so, like, are there ablations here on the kind of, for example, this is like an L2 distance.
Sure, yeah.
But it can very well be argued that because angles are involved, they are no longer L2, maybe they are angular.
No, so these are quaternion measurements, right? So the distances are also in the form of those quaternion differences.
Okay.
Right. So we can do, as what you're saying, you can do L2, we can do distance-based metrics as well, but distance-based metrics are not scalable because humans are differently shaped, right? So that's why we have tried those as well, but so far these non-metrics have been more accurate. I mean, angular or quaternion. So we've used a variety of publicly available data sets, like I'm guessing many of you have worked with these, as well as we've released our own data sets. So obviously a lot of them are either motion captured or they are directly extracted from RGB videos. The caveat here is that some of them are active data sets and some of them are captured in the wild data sets. And that's a separate discussion itself, is which one is better. I mean, of course, real ones are better, but with the real ones, it comes with the caveat that we cannot have motion capture from in the wild data sets. Alright, so with that background, let's look at the full pipeline. So given a short history of a virtual agent's gait, the intended future trajectory, the intended emotion, and the affect and the movement features computed from the gait, our goal is to synthesize the gaits of the virtual agent on a specific real-time trajectory while expressing a certain emotion. A lot of words, but hopefully when I go through this process, you'll get a little bit clearer. Alright, so we formulate this problem as an auto-regression problem, where we are predicting a future set of poses based on a past sequence of poses. And we solve this using an encoder for the past data and a predictor for the future generated data. So the encoder learns separate latent representations for the root joint and the other joints. So the root joint is the only joint which is responsible for the motion of an agent, whereas all the other joints are responsible for the emotional expressiveness of the person. So to predict the future features, we combine these affective features, emotion labels, past trajectory, root features using set of fully connected layers in the encoder, and then predict using another set of fully connected layers. To predict the future forward kinematic parameters for the other body joints, we use a temporal network, the GRU, to efficiently learn from the high dimensional data and predict using another set of fully connected layers. So we train this network using a combination of different losses to ensure that our motions look smooth, kinematically valid, and to eliminate things like foot sliding. So I'll show you some quantitative results for this. So we'll see an emotionally expressive gaits for virtual agents on real-time user-driven trajectories. So we'll see just 4 broad outputs for happy, angry, sad, and neutral. At the same time, we'll also see some results of performing transitions between different emotions. So we can generate smooth and plausible transitions from one expression, one emotion to the next one, while the user is still walking on real-time trajectories. So the boring part of the talk is the results part, where it doesn't make much sense. But so obviously for a lot of these results, it's very hard to get ground truth for all these emotion-driven results. So we conducted two user studies with our synthesized gaits. So for the first study, we tested the null hypothesis that the intended emotion and the perceived emotion for each of these synthesized gait samples lie are in the same distribution space. So as we can see from a part of our results here, with a 95% confidence interval, we are unable to reject the null hypothesis in about 90% of the samples. So we can also look at the intended and the perceived emotion, and we see that in most cases, at least in the sample of 8 gaits, they closely match the 4 broad affects. So for the second study, our objective was to validate the choice of the pose. Like we chose a lot of features from psychology. Whether it actually works or not, we don't know. So to validate those choices, the objective was to figure out for these whether they correlate to the virtual agent's expressiveness. So with this, we obtained the values of the pose affective features observed by the participants from the synthesized gaits on a 5-point Likert scale. In these figures, the rows represent the different emotions and the columns represent the broad pose affective features. So the horizontal axis for each column denotes the Likert scale for the choices of the corresponding features, which ranges from contracted to expanded, slow to fast, erratic to smooth. So the contracted to expanded are things for torso and things like that, whereas things like erratic to smooth to slow and fast are for the actual gait motion. So from the results, we see that the participants vote for these broad pose affective features have distinct modes for different emotions. indicating they are a good choice as features for you know for indicating that these features vary between different emotions, but at the same time are consistent across different observers for a specific emotion. So, a brief summary of this work that we built an auto-regression model to generate emotion gates walking on real-time user-driven trajectories. Our work is based on linear combinations of 4 categorical emotions, as you saw, and we can smoothly transition between different emotions. At the same time, our method comes with a lot of limitations. We feel that this is one of the earliest methods to generate gates with emotional expressiveness, but things like our method still considers a linear space of the representative sample, and eventually in the future, as we saw earlier in the VAD space of emotions, we might want to transition. At the same time, we are only modeling emotions based on just the gate. In the real world, that's never the case. We infer emotions from the context as well, right? So if I'm walking in a sad way in my office, it's very likely that my proposal has been rejected. At the same time, if I'm walking like this at my home, different things may have happened. So the context of where I am, the context of what happened, or different modalities plays a very important role in the other's perception of affect. And in this case, we have limited it very specifically to the motions of that person. So from gates, let's move on to the next form of body expression called gestures. So we want the agents to emote during a conversation. So we as humans naturally produce these rich gestures without effort or kind of subconsciously, right? But to obtain or do this automatically, there are many issues that must be tackled. So what are gestures, and specifically what are co-speech gestures? So these are bodily expressions which are associated with a person's speech that help us understand the context matter or the subject matter or even the context of the speech. So broadly speaking, there are 4 different kinds of co-speech gestures. So there is the beat and the dialectic gestures that are used for more regular or rhythmic movements, such as pointing to people, pointing to objects, as you can see in this short example. I hope the audio plays, but let's see.
To talk about race, and I'll start off by sharing with you my story of growing up Asian American.
The iconic gestures are used to express physical concepts or actions. I'll play this again.
Small artwork, the handshakes.
So this person was saying they make your bed, they may brush your hair. They're talking about physical entities and how to interact with those physical entities, right? And the last one are the metaphoric gestures which describe affect or abstract concepts such as affect or emotions.
All right.
So this lady was saying, I was very sorry to hear that I had breast cancer. I do not have that music. Okay. So prior works in this area focused on synthesizing high quality gestures with individual speaker styles. However, they focused primarily on these 3, the beat gestures or the dialectic gestures or the iconic gestures. In our work, we focus primarily on the quality of these metaphoric gestures, the affect gestures which are responsible for affect, while still maintaining the quality of the other three kinds of gestures. So affective co-speech gestures are not only infrequent, but they vary significantly based on the context and the style of the speaker. At the same time, they are an essential part in human-agent interaction, as the listener's experiences and reactions are shaped by these kind of gestures. So studies in affective computing show that gestures are very good indicators of arousal and dominance. So different valence levels are generally not associated with gestures, and they can be inferred from other cues and other modalities. So emotions with high arousal, such as amusement, tend to be expressed with rapid arm movements, arm swings, head motions, etc. At the same time, emotions with low arousal, such as sadness, they tend to be expressed with more subtle and slow motions. Again, emotions with high dominance, such as pride, tend to be expressed by an expanded upper body, spread arms, upright head positions. On the other hand, emotions such as fear tend to be expressed with arms, contracted arms close to the body, and collapsed head positions. Again, I'll just run past all of these things which you've seen before, but we consider a similar set of affective features as we did for the gaits, but more relying on the upper body parts. That's where most of the gestures reside. So our goal is to synthesize affective co-speech gestures that follow the individual speaker styles of gesticulation. In this specific work, as opposed to the last work, we do not assume that we have the emotion directly mentioned by the speaker. Rather, we implicitly learn the emotion based on the speech and other cues from the video. So let's look at one of the synthesized examples to see what I really mean by that.
I was, I believe, ecologically bored.
So we see the speaker's arm movement when this person says bored, indicating sort of frustration when this person says bored. I don't know, the audio didn't play very clearly.
A wider space beyond. I was, I believe, ecologically bored.
So to be able to synthesize such affective gestures, we have to learn from a latent set of affective features based on body poses, head positions, and arm movements. At the same time, to synchronize our affects with the affects in a speech, we design an MFCC encoder, or the meld frequency Keppel coefficient encoder, where our encoder maps things like speech-based affective cues such as prosody, tone of your voice, the intonation, to learnable latent features and sort of to guide the overall gesture synthesis. So I give this example to demonstrate what I really mean by it. We were discussing in the morning. When you're talking to your friend, you ask the question, "How are you feeling today?" Your friend might say, "I'm feeling okay." The friend might say the same thing in a different way. "I'm feeling okay." Or you can say, "I'm feeling okay." It's the same text, it's the same content, but you see how the speech or the body language completely express three different kinds of emotions or something on a completely different spectrum. So the tone of your voice, the different vocal features, your head feet, your body language can tell a story which is way beyond just the content of the speech. So that's what we're trying to learn. We're not just learning from the speech, from the content of the speech, but we are trying to learn from other modalities surrounding that content. So similar to the last problem, we formulate our problem as a sequence prediction task, and we learn the conditional distribution space as a neural network. So a neural network function is represented by the function f. So it takes in the speech s and the motion g bar as input, and is conditioned on the emotion labels and agent attributes collectively called E. So for optimizing the network, we prepare loss functions using the distance metric between the predicted or the generated and the target motions, as well as their time derivatives or motion velocities. And to better constrain the losses, we add regularization in the form of the affective features I talked about Similarly, we use many publicly available data sets. We didn't capture anything ourselves for this project, but these are three very popular gesture-driven data sets: the TED gesture, the Ginia challenge, and the IIITD data set, which help we learn from these three data sources. So to synthesize 4 speech gestures, we need to consider both the source speech and the individual styles of the speakers. So specifically, we take in the raw speech audio of the speaker, or we can use a speech generator for a robot or a virtual agent. The corresponding text transcript, not to directly learn any affect from it, but sort of a complementary information to safeguard against the noise if it exists in the speech. The speaker's unique ID and a short sequence of poses to synthesize the speaker's affective gestures while matching the individual styles. So we use separate encoders to encode the speech, text, the ID, and the affective content of the speakers into latent features. So we use a text encoder to encode the words into latent features. We use a speaker encoder to encode the speaker ID into a latent distribution space. To encode the speech, we transform the raw speech waveform into meld frequency Kettler coefficients and their first and second order derivatives. So as I said before, MFCCs are useful for identifying speech-based emotion or affective cues such as prosody or intonation, and we design a set of convolution neural network layers to obtain the latent features from these MFCCs. Again, MFCCs are not closely dependent on the individual words. Rather, they are dependent on the verbalization of those words. So we also design an affective encoder which takes into account the pose sequences and transform them into latent gesture affective features. So to achieve this, we learn from the body movements at 2 different levels of hierarchy. So first one is at the level of the individual bone. So whenever I'm saying something, just take a look at what I'm referring to using those red lines, where we encode the relative movements of the bones into feature representations. To capture the relative movement, we consider a 2-hop neighborhood for each bone to define their spatial adjacencies. In other words, we consider 2 bones to be spatially adjacent if A, they actually share a joint, B, they are connected to two ends of a 3rd bone, and C, for temporal adjacency, we consider the same bone joint at 2 different time steps. As a result, we can efficiently encode their differences in the relative movements for different kinds of affects or emotion. To perform the encoding, we utilize the spatio-temporal graph convolution network or STGCNs, which are commonly used to compute features, used for computing features from localized dependencies in graph structure data. Similarly, the second hierarchy is at the level of the 3 upper body parts. So the trunk and the 2 arms. So these upper parts, this is more of a microscopic representation, but the upper body parts sort of have a more macroscopic level representation of the things, sort of capturing arm movements, trunk bending, arms crossing and things like that. At this level, we assume that the arms to be adjacent to the torso, but not to each other, because the movement of one arm doesn't necessarily need to influence the movement of the second arm. So again, similar to the first one, we use another set of STGCN for the feature encoding, and then to reduce the dimensionality, we pass the latent affective features, the outputs of the second STGCN through a set of convolutional layers, capturing the interdependency between these intermediate features. Alright, so coming back to the full network, we proceed to synthesize the gestures from the 4 latent features that we talked earlier, the MFCC, the text, the speaker, and the affect, by concatenating them and passing them through by GRU or a by gated recurrent unit. So this provides temporally related intermediate information, which we then transform into output pose vectors using a set of fully connected layers. So we term this whole thing as our generator. Right? So However, just using the generator itself does not ensure that we get the gestures, that look realistic. To achieve that, we need to couple our generator with an adversarial discriminator, which can distinguish between the original and the synthesized gestures. So we pass the synthesized gestures to our discriminator along with the corresponding original original gestures of the speaker. So we make use of our affective encoder to transform both the gestures into per time state latent affective features. To discriminate them based on the affective features. We again use a BiGRU and a set of fully connected layers to transform these latent features into a single dimensional variable, so we can then efficiently train the discriminator to optimize these labels using a cross entropy loss. So correspondingly, the goal of our generator is to synthesize gesture that our discriminator cannot distinguish from the original gesture. So once the generator is fully trained, we can use it to synthesize our desired affective post-speech gestures. Okay, so let's look at some qualitative results, comparisons of our synthesized gestures on the benchmark TED gesture dataset. So the TED gesture dataset is consists of videos of in English language speeches at TED Talks. So let's look at the video we've seen this specific example before, but I'm going to show it to you again because we are comparing it with prior method, and we can also take a look at the original video.
I believe, ecologically poor.
So here again, GTC denotes the prior state of the art. So their method synthesizes based on the first three kinds of gestures, but not on the metaphoric or the affective gestures.
I believe, ecologically poor.
So we can see that the synthesized arm movements matching, the frustration of the word bored. At the same time, we see that both these methods generate something very different from the original speakers, right? So this is a desired characteristic because we want to change different speaker styles and yet be able to capture some properties or some characteristics of the affect of the gestures and then transfer them into a different speaker style. So let's look at one more result because I'm not sure how much time I have.
My process of research. I was very excited to find that there was a product out there called the Clean Birth Kit. Of research. I was very excited to find that there was a product out there called the Clean Birth Kit.
So again, you can see the speaker's excitement on the word, speaker's happiness on the word excited. So I'm going to play this one more time.
Research. I was very excited to find that there was a product out there called the Clean Birth Kit.
So I'll skip some more results in the interest of time, but these slides I can make them public if you want to see more results. So we also compared the quantitative results of our method on different baseline on three different commonly used metrics, the MAGE, the MAD, and the FGD. So the MAGE, or the mean absolute joint error, sort of measures the difference between the joint positions of the original one and the generated one. The MAD, I believe, indicates how closely the original joint movements match, sort of how expressive the characters are. And FGD, or the pressure gesture distance, has been shown to align with the plausibility of those gestures with the given speech. So in all of those three cases in both the data sets, we see that our method outperforms all the other methods, especially for gesture generation. And last but not least, we conducted a user study because perceptual evaluation is key in affect generation research. So we used two different researches. The first part to determine how plausible the gestures appeared on a 5-point Likert scale. So we found that about 15% of participants preferred our method compared to the state of the art. What was even more interesting, or some would say, some skeptical of you say that it's weird that 3.8% of participants actually thought ours was better than the original speaker itself. Now, there are multiple reasons for, 3.58 is like a very small number, so partly it is noise. But at the same time, these gestures are all different. They all have different speaker styles. So maybe some users preferred our speaker styles compared to the original, or some speakers preferred their. So this also tells that there is a difference between the styles of the speaking, but at the same time, they are very close to what the original intended affect is. Similarly, we had a second study which determined how well these gestures synchronized with the speech, with the input speech. Again, very similarly, we saw about 16% people preferred ours, at least they felt in the last two categories compared to the prior state-of-the-art method, and about 4%, 4.8% thought that ours was better than the original. All right, so we have a generative adversarial network to synthesize co-speech gestures. Our method is label-free compared to what we did for Gates. We do not actually explicitly learn emotion labels. So we have an affective encoder to learn the latent post-affective features, and we designed a speech-based MFCC encoder to guide the gesture synthesis. So obviously we have a lot of limitations. We do not build a mechanism to control these expressions, but we compute them automatically from the input modalities. So our future plan at some point is to investigate the interface between the expressions from the speech and the gestures, especially when expressing contradictory cues such as sarcasm or irony, where these modalities sometimes contradict each other, right? So obviously we plan to use a finer representation of body joints. This is a hit and miss. The more body joints or the more representation, we were just talking about this in the PhD meeting, that the more joints you learn, the slower your network will become, and it will take much more time to learn. So depending on your application, if your application is an animation, then maybe it's fine, but if you have a more scientific application, maybe a finer representation would be beneficial. And last but not least, we are just looking at upper body, and we did this primarily because we couldn't look at the lower body, part of the video from the TED videos in many cases. So we just looked at the upper body. But we may be missing out on a lot of information which is coming from the foot motion. Even though most of the gesture happens on the upper body, some of the leaking emotions happen through the lower body, which can tell a lot more information, especially when we take into account things like locomotion or walking. So coming back to the broader research question, so in order to simulate interactive and functional virtual agents, we need many ingredients. And what we saw today was just two of the many ingredients we need to solve this puzzle. So sort of to recap, we looked at modeling affect-driven gaits or walking styles. We looked at some, how gestures reflects an agent's internal behavioral thoughts and how we can model them. In the interest of time, of course, we couldn't cover many things, one of them being hand gestures. So hand gestures help to take what's in our mind and make it intelligible to others. Clearly, you see, I use a lot of hand gestures, right? Not everybody does. But to me, it's a very important cue to express my emotion or express what I want to say and make it intelligible to the community. So this is something we are actively working on right now. Hopefully in the future, this will be integrated as one big cohesive software. So far I've talked about body expression generation approaches, right? All this thing is from a graphic point of view. But to actually enable and develop better conversational agents, we need better perception or detection algorithm as well. Like if you want to have a conversation with a virtual agent, the agent should not only be able to emote, but also able to understand what you have to say. So we are working with, beyond the traditional realm of graphics and affective computing, we are working with computer vision researchers to model different kinds of conflict-driven affect prediction or multimodal emotion learning. So these are more computer vision-like problems. So the other side of the spectrum, to be able to build something cohesive. And beyond the generation of characters in virtual or metaverse world, locomotion or walking, which I believe will play a very critical role in designing the next metaverse for us. So we are working on something called redirected walking. So I'll give a little bit context of what this means. So imagine you're wearing VR headsets, right? And you're traveling in, I don't know, virtual Goa. I don't know, what is a fancy place kids are into these days, right? Traveling in a virtual Goa or your favorite dream place, right? Unfortunately, if you want to walk in a virtual Goa, you are still limited by the walls. You can't bump into walls. You won't be able to travel wherever you are by just walking in VR, right? You're limited by physical constraints. Now, what we are trying to do is using different physics-driven hacks, or I mean, as a scientist, I should call them hacks. These are redirection techniques where you trick your mind to thinking that you're in a much larger space. So, let's say when you wear the VR headset, you see your virtual environment. When you blink your eye, or when you're looking somewhere, if you move the environment by 1 pixel, or like 1 pixel, or when you walk at 1.1 meters per second, in the virtual world you're walking at 1.101 meters per second, these small changes in your trajectory, these small changes in your path, in your angle, your brain is unable to perceive those differences, right? So what you can do is imperceptibly move the virtual environment to the point that you don't realize that you're being moved, but you're actually experiencing a much larger space. So this video, this person, this blue wall is the actual room, and this ground is what this person feels like. So this person is actually moving in circles in the actual room, but in VR, this person feels that he's walking on an infinitely long pathway.
So you have to adjust speeds.
Yes, so that's what I'm saying. 1.1 meters per second, you can do 1.01 meters per
So
second.
if the person starts walking fast in a circle, then you physically feel that he's walking in circles.
You have to adjust. So these are called thresholds. So brain thresholds. If you go beyond that, of course you'll feel nauseated. It's not that you'll feel that something is wrong. You will actually start feeling sick if it's more than that. And motion sickness partly is that when you are in one motion. When you're in a boat, right, you see a different motion and your brain is perceiving a different motion. That difference is, but this is way below that limit. And your brain has a learning curve. So if you slowly increase the speed from 0.01 meters per second, increase, and you keep on adding a little bit more. Of course, beyond this, if you make 1 meter to 2 meters per second, your brain is going to say, stop fooling, right? But if you slowly increase it to 1.1, 1.2, you can still fool the brain to think that you are moving, like you won't realize the difference. Another thing we are working on is maybe when we blink the eye, just when we blink the eye, we move the virtual world just by a little bit, you curve the virtual world just by a little bit that you don't realize. Or there are other methods, it's something called distractors, where you're in a virtual world and a pretty bird flies by. So you look at the bird, but you forget that the world around you has moved a little bit. Or you don't see that the world around you has moved. So these are more psychology-driven work. We have won many awards in this whole spectrum of redirected walking, where we are trying to fool the person to believing that they are much larger space. Because believe it or not, obviously we all know the space is one of the most precious thing right now we have. My office is way smaller than most of even rooms in this IIIT. So if I were to feel that I'm walking outside, like in COVID, I really wanted to experience what it would go outside, but I couldn't. But if I were to implement these things in the VR space, maybe, just maybe, I can experience something much more than what truly exists in my room. So so there are many different methods. I don't want to go into the depth of all these specific papers we did, but again, as I said, one of the many ingredients to enable. Let me give it 1 second to restart the program. I don't know why this happens. How many of you have played around with virtual reality headsets, and what is the biggest problem do you see with the current headsets, or the current content on these headsets?
My research actually lies around VR, so I usually use it from a more researcher kind of perspective than the user perspective. But I've seen users mostly facing the main issue of simulator sickness, which is the foremost issue.
That's what
Yeah.
you were, yeah.
Yeah, and the second one is again, because of which I have read about redirected working use, that your virtual space and your physical space dimensions are not matching.
The match, yeah.
Yeah.
So the simulator sickness you're talking about, right? Like this is what you were asking, I think.
Yeah.
Like what happens if it goes beyond, like you start feeling sick. And so this is, I always feel like this is less mathematical but a lot of more perceptual in many ways, this specific aspect. But there is a lot of work to be done in this redirected walking a virtual world. I mean, we will always, like if Facebook really wants a metaverse-like world, either you sit on the screen or sit on your, chairs and then think of you're still restricted. You can't really walk freely, right? So VR is still a lot about perception than we think it is, right? So anyway, we have talked about a lot of these ingredients in affect modeling, and we talked about some of these. We briefly browsed through, but I'm going to show you some video clips of the applications we are using for using all these ingredients. So basically, I'm going to show you some dishes from these ingredients I showed you before. So this is a project which we call Project Dost. So our hope is to combine a detection and generation work with realistic interactive avatars to have conversations like real humans. Not only in terms of content, but also in terms of emotional behavior expression. It's a very starting, it just started like a year ago. We just started this project. So the goal is to make a virtual agent who is a friend. Now, what makes it different from any other virtual agent, right? Any other virtual agent may not know about your history, may not know how you react to things, may not know what makes you feel better. But this project is about building a long-term causal friend which learns from you, understands you, and then tomorrow when you meet this friend, it sort of knows how to interact with you. We haven't included the hand gestures for this project, so the hands will look very weird, just warning you ahead of time.
Oh, you're the virtual conversational assistant. I can help you with daily chores, tasks, and will be able to make smart conversations.
My gestures, facial expressions, and speech are generated in real time.
When I say don't look at the hands, people focus
research
on
in
the
effective
So
computing,
please don't.
emotional modeling, character and speech generation, and virtual reality.
I was designed at the University of Maryland. I can not only speak different languages, but can also generate cultural and emotion-sensitive gestures and expressions.
In the future, I will be able to understand you better, learning from you and your emotional states.
Approach is a transformer-based.
So, using Project Dost as sort of the baseline for many projects. So my students and I are working on a funded project with NIH and the Maryland Medical School to develop a technological approach to assess a patient's behavior state, but at the same time create these virtual agents to interact with you, increase engagement in a conversation. So our project is looking at people who are at the most risk of depression, especially during COVID time. So we built this sort of platform to bridge real therapy sessions, because again, there is a big demand-supply gap in therapy, especially in the US, especially after COVID, when everybody wanted help, mental health resources, but we just didn't have as many therapists available. So our hope was that we build this virtual agent to bridge the gaps between real therapy sessions, talk to you, see if you're on the right medication, see if you need something else, and then if it's emergency, directly connect to your doctor. At the same time, we are working with police forces and this project Google to develop virtual embodiment tools for law enforcement agencies to reduce implicit racial bias. So we are building these large-scale VR scenarios to train police officers to experience racial bias and in embodied characters. So I don't know how much you follow the news in terms of what's going on in the US. Police shootings have become fairly, unfortunately very common, and there is a big trust gap between people and the police force. It's kind of overstretching to say that all police men are bad or everybody is, training leads to, the lack of training leads to a lot of problems, especially in diverse places like Baltimore, where there's a significant amount of African American population, but most of the force is white males, right? So we are actually training police officers to experience what it feels like to be in the skin of another person, or what it feels like to experience different races, right? There's so many Indians in the US right now, but very few people, very few officers have actually seen Indians, have seen Asians. So we are actually working with the police pen to show them, train them on different scenarios.
First time here. I'm the one who's being harassed.
Sir, is your wife in there? Do you have a wife in there? And qualified as
That's a real policeman wearing a VR headset, and this is like a simulated scenario with different options, different trajectories for stories.
Do you have a wife in that house, girl? Inside the house?
So this person was called for domestic abuse, and this person is trying to handle it as delicately as possible, still trying to respect, the race or the culture. Anyway, so since we are working on joint level data, a lot of our algorithms can be transferred to things like humanoid looking robots. So you see on your left side, you see this Pepper robot which we built is interacting with a human, with human-like gestures and conversation. So obviously there's a lot of problems in this whole spectrum of transferring gestures from humans to robots, right? I mean, these robots have lower degrees of freedom usually. These robots have different emotions. I mean, I was telling this in the morning that one of the robot which we thought that we transferred happiness to the robot in certain sentences, but most people ended up feeling that that robot was being aggressive to it. So emotions don't transfer very naturally from one agent to the other, and that's where we are working on some research problems. All right, so just some pat on the back for myself. A lot of the work has won academic awards, including best papers at many VR, AR, AI conferences, and been featured by many media houses, including Science, Forbes, Wired, and many others. So, there's so many exciting avenues, and I'm coming to the crux of today's talk, exciting avenues, research problems, sub-problems that we want to pursue in our lab over the next few years. So even though our research, there are multiple components, you see, I mean, this is not an inclusive list, but it fundamentally relies on collaborations from many different research groups, especially at IIIT here, and I think I've misspelled IIIT there, so please don't see that.
Media tends to do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I apologize. So we want to not only build these existing blocks, but understand these connections as well. And I believe some really novel research and understanding of the human mind is in these connections. And collaborations with other groups here at IIIT is not just a good thing to have, but a necessity for researchers like myself. So most of our affective results are based on correlation and not causation. Therefore, and it tends to lack the right actionable insights and models to explain the predictions being made. So because of our lab's highly perceptual nature, we need to work with machine learning groups, possibly here at IIIT, to design algorithms that improve explainability, fairness, and understand causality. Similarly, virtual agents also need to interact, communicate intelligently. So we need to build NLP-based algorithms to complement our agents' affective states, cultures, and other variables. And obviously, there's a lot of research on HCI, HRI, social robotics, where you can generate these virtual avatars or social robots that can interact with humans intelligently as well as socially. So, modeling these connections will also require collaborations with researchers outside the traditional computer science domain, like psychology, psychiatry, many others. So I've been working on this problem for almost 12 years now, and we have borrowed from many psychology theories, collaborated with psychiatrists, used their gold standards. But what my group's real dream would be that we in computer science can contribute something to their field, and someday they use that as their gold standards. With that, I would like to conclude with some, final acknowledgements and some information about Purdue and how many folks can collaborate outside this general collaboration spiel. We have at Purdue we have this Purdue India partnership where we collaborate with really good universities in India, where we invite students and research to spend 6 months a year, fully funded internship, mostly for doctoral students. Internships at Purdue for 6 months to a year, and they get to build their research career, apply for a postdoc in the US or many other possibilities. So I highly encourage you to Google search this Purdue India partnership if you guys are interested. And last but not least, we are always hiring in my lab, researchers, postdoc, PhD students. The deadline for graduate applications is tomorrow. If any one of you is interested, please reach out to me before I head out. And last but not least, none of this research would have been possible without my wonderful, diverse set of students. This is an old picture, we have more now. And special thanks to my academic collaborators. Oh yeah, I should not forget thanking my funding agencies for paying the bills. Thank you.
So I guess that was a very fascinating talk. We do have a short amount of time left, but are there any questions for Aniket?
So one quick question. So though you are genetic gesture and probably the way it is, do you see some applications using the deep fake where probably rather than avatars you are generating the real person's movement, emotional movement?
Yeah, we were just talking about this in the morning. We had a interesting interview session with. So we are currently working on generating like a full image-based thing instead of just the gestures part. But in one of the previous work, we worked on deepfake detection based on emotions, affect-driven. So, what was the paper? I forgot the name of my own paper. Emotions don't lie. Thank you. So the goal is that there's a lot of computer vision methods to detect deepfakes, right? But what we found is that as an affective computing researcher, we found that in many of these deepfake videos, there's something wrong with the facial expressions. They look real, but they're unable to capture the hidden emotion when it comes to the speech. The speech is from a real actor or something, right? But when you deepfake that face with somebody else's face, a lot of times the emotions don't carry properly. So what we did is add on to whatever deepfake methods we have, build another pipeline to do this deepfake detection based on, do the emotions in the speech match the emotions on this face? We built this MFCC encoder, right? The speech-based emotion cues. Do the facial expression-based emotions, the text, do the speech, do they correlate? If not, like your face cannot say that you're happy and your text or your sound cannot say that you're sad. If those kind of correlations or inverse relations, whatever you want to call it, happen, then there's something wrong and maybe it can be flagged as a potential deepfake. I was talking to Janet in the morning that 4 years ago or 3 years ago when I was working on this, I saw in India like a lot of politicians using deepfake, and I was totally surprised that I was happy that there's deepfake in India, but I was also not happy that this is very scary because information in India flows very rapidly to the remotest parts of the country, right? So it's very scary if something bad. I think I saw Lalu Prasad Yadav in speaking some Arvind Kejriwal's something like that. I forgot what it was, but it was like funny, but I could understand it, but I don't think most people would be able to, like especially the masses, right? So that's why I think deepfake detection is very important, and as affective computing researchers, we have only tried. I don't know how much we'll be successful because tomorrow somebody will build a deepfake to incorporate all of these things into the deepfake generation model, right?
Any more questions for him?
So probably last question. So whenever you are generating like different emotion through the gait and hand movement, so I don't know whether you are able to generate the emotion through eyes as well. I mean, does the person blinking eye
Not yet, because we haven't done face generation yet. Like face generation is, a lot of people are working on it, right? So that's why we so far have avoided it. But we, as we go ahead, we want to have this like face represented by many points as well as eye movements as well. We have avoided faces because it's one of the more well studied ones. But what was your question? Sorry. I mean maybe I can answer it from what has been done.
I mean, when you look into the emotion, do you also look into eyes?
I haven't done it, but people do, yes. Like eyebrows is a very important part.
Yeah.
I would say eyebrows tell a lot about somebody's expression, emotion. There are some parts of the eyes, like the eyebrows, or like some sections of the face which are heavily, I have a beard, so I don't know how easy it is, but I know that eyebrows are one of the most important parts of the face when it comes to emotion.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very nice and great work.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Aniket. I think it was a beautiful talk. And as a token of token of appreciation, we have something for you from Center for Design and New Media. So it's a small.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
So thanks a lot, everyone. And for any doubts, anything, please feel free to reach out to Aniket as we will in the video. And thanks a lot, everyone.
You apply already? Okay. So have you applied to other places or oops, I should have some down. Yeah, let's sit. I think you can sit here for 5 minutes.
सर ये स्टॉप कैसे होगा? हाँ, हैंडल के साइड में। हाँ, इसको प्रेस करो।